Well, there was once a Jewish rabbi who asked some of his colleagues, where does God dwell? Where does God live? Now, these were learned men and they knew their Bible, and they actually laughed the rabbi for asking such a simple question. They said, well, what a thing to ask. Isn't the whole world full of his glory? And then after a pause, the rabbi answered, God dwells wherever man lets him in. God dwells wherever man lets him in. Well, today is the last Sunday of Advent. We're on the brink of Christmas, and at the heart of today is the young Jewish girl who let God in, Mary. She did that in the event we call the Annunciation, the first joyful mystery of the Rosary. She did it at the end of her conversation with the angel. Her answer was sung at the Gospel acclamation, I am the handmaid of the Lord, let what you have said be done to me. And in the Gospel we've just heard, story follows straight on, Elizabeth says to her, she believed that the promise made her by the Lord would be fulfilled. So God dwells wherever we let him in. Forgive me saying this, but God is not a rapist, right? The relationship is consensual. Now, yesterday, I rang 3 doorbells and nobody answered. You know, this is an experience we often have. It wasn't a doorbell here, I hasten to add. But on God's behalf, we might say, the angel rang the doorbell at whatever Mary's address was, I don't know, 21 Side Lane, Nazareth, or whatever, and Mary opened the door. And afterwards, in what we call the Visitation, the second joyful mystery of the Rosary, we just had part of that in the Gospel today, Mary entered Zechariah's house and greeted Elizabeth, and the child in Elizabeth's womb, John the Baptist, answered the door, let's say, when he leapt for joy in his mother's womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit and sang the praise of Mary and her child. God dwells wherever we let him in. And this is what happened in that house of Zechariah and Elizabeth. The whole Trinity actually came through the door. Amazing. But why did Mary do this? Or how could Mary do this? To open the door on behalf of us all and let God in. Well, let's think about her. She was a daughter of Abraham, and she knew that Abraham, so many hundred years ago, had believed God's promise of a child despite his and his wife's great age, and then how joy had come to them through the birth of Isaac. Mary could recall from the history of her people how when the Lord wanted to come to them through the law and the covenant, they had responded with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has said, we will do. They let God in. And she knew, again from her history, how the leaders and the judges and the prophets of her people, for all their fears, had accepted their missions from God. She would remember how the old priest Eli had told his young acolyte Samuel what to say when his name was called. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. This is the obedience of faith, and it was in Mary's genes, as it were. The ear of her heart was an open one. She was a child of this beautiful culture, and she was honed more deeply still by the grace of her Immaculate Conception, which enabled her to hear and to say yes. So when the fullness of time came, when what was being offered was more than a promise or a law or a mission. When the angel began to speak of a Messiah who was the Son of God and would be conceived by the Holy Spirit, she could let God in. God dwells where man or woman lets him in. And then, just like oil or water or fire, God, as it were, spreads and humanity expands. Mary arose with haste and went to visit her cousin. Mary becomes the Virgin Mother of God, a dwelling place of the Lord, and the joy of his presence spreads. It becomes clear to Joseph what has happened. It is carried to Zechariah and Elizabeth, and the child leaps in the womb. And then, after the birth, to the shepherds and the wise men. And then, in the power of Pentecost, into the whole world. And that is why we're here. Because this fire, this oil, this water, this grace of God has come to us. Now, the second reading takes us even further, because it puts words on the lips of Christ as he came into the world. And Jesus is seen as pictured as taking up that whole history of Israelite obedience, which culminated in his mother's fiat and then would be crowned with his own. This is what Christ said to his Father on coming into the world. You who wanted no sacrifice or oblation prepared a body for me. God, here I am. I am coming to do your will. And by that obedience, which was renewed in Gethsemane in a sweat of blood and fulfilled on the cross, God the Father could come in. Through the door of the Son's obedience, the Father could come in. To echo the psalm that we had, beautiful psalm, he could rouse up his might, come to our help, shine from his cherubim throne. He could visit this vine and protect it. He could be fully Father and raise his Son from the dead and send the Holy Spirit into the world. So thanks to the Annunciation, thanks to Gethsemane, thanks to Mary letting the Son in, thanks to Jesus letting his Father in, the resurrection and Pentecost have happened, and the whole Trinity has come in, and a new humanity has begun. Well, once some Jews went to another rabbi, and they spoke with him about all the human unhappiness there is in the world, all the misery, all the suffering, all the grief. And the rabbi listened, and he bowed his head. He was sunk in grief himself. And then he raised it, and he said, let us draw God into the world, and all need will be taken away. Let us draw God into the world. That's really the fourth Sunday of Advent. That's the Annunciation. So here we are, St. Mary's Parish, an assembly of the baptized, the church in this place. And who are we? Who are we? You know, other than our names and so on. We are Mary. Doesn't matter what your gender is. We are Mary. And there is the same knock on the door and the ring at the bell. The liturgy is like the angel, and it comes with this huge promise. Christ alive, Christ present in the Eucharist, Christ filling each and all of us with his truth and grace, Christ sending us forth. Christmas renewed and continued in us. Blessed is she who believed that the promise made her by the Lord would be fulfilled. Those words of Elizabeth could be spoken to us. That blessing is waiting for us, hovering over us, if you like. So here we are, brothers and sisters, making our way through life, hobbling along in the time that is allotted us, and what's it all for? Why do I have a life? Why do I have a body? Why do I have freedom? What are we for? What is this community for? This parish for? To be the place where the God of glory dwells. And where does he dwell? Well, the rabbi gave the answer. He dwells where man lets him in. Mary gave the answer, and we are invited today to make her answer our answer. Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let what you have said be done to me. And God came in because she let him.